In the glittering chaos of Las Vegas, billionaire investor Damon Steele arrives with one purpose: to close a high-stakes business deal that could expand his empire. Calculated, disciplined, and always in control, Damon thrives in boardrooms, not casinos. But one reckless night changes everything. Damon crosses paths with Samira Brookes, a striking woman whose laughter is as bold as her spirit. One drink turns into several, a casual bet turns into wild gambling, and before long, they're swept into a whirlwind of intoxicating passion and unexpected surprises. Welcome to our channel. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep the conversation going. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The 32nd floor of the Wind Tower offered a view that most men would kill for, the sprawling desert city laid out like a glittering circuit board beneath the Nevada sun. Damon Steele barely glanced at it. His attention was fixed on the contract spread across the mahogany conference table, every clause dissected with surgical precision. "The terms are non-negotiable," Richard Hawthorne said from across the table, his silver hair catching the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The casino mogul's smile was as calculated as his reputation. 70-30 split or we walk. Damon's jaw tightened imperceptibly. 3 years of careful maneuvering had led to this moment. The acquisition that would cement Steele Enterprises as a dominant force in hospitality and entertainment. The numbers were aggressive, borderline insulting, but Hawthorne held the cards. Literally. The man owned half the strip. 60-40, Damon countered, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built his empire. "And I want controlling interest in the Atlantic City properties." Around the table, Hawthorne's lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Damon had learned long ago that discomfort was leverage. He'd also learned that showing emotion was weakness, and weakness was something he couldn't afford. His phone buzzed against the table. A text from his assistant. "Board meeting moved to 6 p.m. Martinez wants quarterly projections by morning." Damon silenced the device without reading the rest. There would be more messages, there always were. Conference calls with Tokyo, reports from London, decisions that couldn't wait. His life was a carefully orchestrated symphony of deadlines and deals, each note precisely placed. Damon silenced the device without reading the rest. There would be more messages, there always were. Conference calls with Tokyo, reports from London, decisions that couldn't wait. His life was a carefully orchestrated symphony of deadlines and deals, each note precisely placed. "You drive a hard bargain, Steele." Hawthorne leaned back in his chair, studying Damon with the calculating gaze of a man who'd built his fortune reading people. "But then, I suppose that's how you've managed to accumulate such an impressive portfolio by 35. 35. The number sat heavier these days, though Damon would never admit it. While his contemporaries were settling down, starting families, posting pictures of weekend barbecues on social media, he was here. Always here, in some boardroom or another, negotiating the next acquisition, the next merger, the next step up an increasingly lonely ladder. "Success requires sacrifice," Damon said, the words automatic. He'd been giving that response for years to business magazines, to concerned relatives, to himself in the mirror of his empty penthouse. "Indeed it does." Hawthorne's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, when was the last time you took a vacation? Really took one, not just answered emails from a different time zone?" The question caught Damon off guard. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. Hawthorne's smile widened. "I'll consider your terms," the older man said, standing and straightening his Italian suit. "Enjoy Las Vegas while you're here, Steele. The city has a way of reminding people what they're missing." As Hawthorne and his entourage filed out, Damon remained seated, staring at the contract that represented everything he'd worked for. The silence of the empty conference room felt heavier than usual, broken only by the distant hum of slot machines 32 floors below. His reflection stared back from the dark screen of his phone, sharp cheekbones, steel gray eyes, the kind of face that commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors. It was also the face of a man who hadn't laughed, really laughed, in longer than he cared to remember. Outside, Vegas glittered with promise and possibility, a playground for dreamers and fools. Damon Steele was neither. He was a man with a plan, a reputation to protect, and walls built so high that he'd forgotten what existed beyond them. He had no idea that tonight, everything would change. The Bellagio's High Roller Lounge was exactly the kind of place Damon normally avoided. All crystal chandeliers and artificial intimacy, designed to part wealthy men from their money. But after 6 hours of conference calls and another dead-end conversation with Hawthorne's lawyers, even his discipline had limits. One drink, he told himself. Then back to the suite to review contracts. He'd barely settled at the bar when she walked in. She moved like liquid confidence, her emerald dress hugging curves that could stop traffic while somehow managing to look effortlessly elegant rather than calculated. Dark skin gleamed under the amber lighting, and when she laughed at something her companion said, the sound cut through the lounge's pretentious atmosphere like champagne bubbles rising to the surface. Damon found himself staring. He never stared. "Whiskey neat," he told the bartender, forcing his attention back to his phone. Martinez's latest email could wait, but discipline was discipline. "Make that 2, came a voice beside him, rich and warm with just a hint of smokiness that made his pulse quicken. "Though mine better be the good stuff, not whatever watered-down tourist trap you're pushing tonight." Damon looked up to find her sliding onto the stool next to his, those laughing eyes now fixed on him with undisguised amusement. Up close, she was even more stunning. High cheekbones, full lips that curved naturally into a smile, and an energy that seemed to make the very air around her vibrate. "Bold assumption," he said, surprised by his own response. He didn't engage with strangers. Ever. "How do you know I'm not ordering the tourist trap whiskey?" She tilted her head, studying him with the kind of directness that usually made people uncomfortable. Damon found it oddly refreshing. "Please. That suit costs more than most people's cars, your watch is Swiss, and you've been checking your phone every 30 seconds since you sat down." She accepted her whiskey from the bartender and took a sip, her eyes never leaving his. "You're either a very well-dressed workaholic or a very successful criminal. I'm betting workaholic. And what if you're wrong?" Then this conversation just got a lot more interesting. She extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Samira Brookes. And you are?" "Damon." He shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip, the way she didn't immediately let go. "Just Damon." "Oh, we're playing mysterious tonight?" Samira's laugh was like music, infectious in a way that made him want to smile despite himself. "Let me guess, tech mogul? Real estate?" "No, wait." She studied his face with theatrical intensity. "Hedge fund prince with a god complex and a collection of sports cars you never drive because you're too busy making money to have fun." Damon nearly choked on his whiskey. She wasn't entirely wrong, which was disturbing on multiple levels. "Close," he said, setting down his glass. "What about you? Let me try." He found himself leaning closer, drawn in by her warmth. "Artist? You have paint under your nails, but they're too well maintained for you to be starving. Gallery owner, maybe. Independent, obviously successful, and definitely not impressed by expensive suits. Not bad." Samira's smile widened. "Though I prefer creatively fulfilled to successful. Money's just a tool, not a trophy." Spoken like someone who's never had to worry about it. Spoken like someone who's never had to live without it, she shot back, but her tone remained light, teasing rather than accusatory. "Tell me just, Damon, when was the last time you did something completely impractical? Something that didn't contribute to your portfolio or your 5-year plan?" The question hit closer to home than he cared to admit. When had been the last time? He couldn't remember. "I'm in Vegas," he said finally. "That's fairly impractical. For business doesn't count." Samira signaled the bartender for another round, her movements graceful and unhurried. Everything about her seemed unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world. "I'm talking about real spontaneity. The kind that scares responsible people. Maybe I don't like being scared. Maybe that's your problem." The words should have irritated him. Instead, they sent an unexpected thrill down his spine. When was the last time someone had challenged him like this? When was the last time someone had looked at him and seen anything other than dollar signs or opportunities? "And what would you suggest?" he heard himself asking. Samira's smile turned wicked. "Well, we could start with you putting that phone away for more than 5 minutes. Fair warning, it might cause withdrawal symptoms." Damon glanced down at his device, which had indeed been buzzing insistently. 3 new emails, 2 missed calls. His jaw tightened reflexively. "Afraid?" Samira's voice was soft, but he caught the dare underneath. Without breaking eye contact, Damon powered off his phone and slipped it into his jacket pocket. The silence felt strange, liberating and terrifying in equal measure. "Impressive," Samira said, raising her glass. "To small victories." They touched glasses and Damon felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening he hadn't experienced in years. Maybe it was the whiskey, or maybe it was the way she looked at him like he was a person rather than a portfolio. Either way, he found himself wanting to know more. "So what's a creatively fulfilled gallery owner doing drinking alone in a casino bar?" "Who says I was alone?" Samira nodded toward a table across the room where a group of women was laughing loudly, clearly several drinks in. "Girls' weekend. Though they seemed to have found their own entertainment. And you wandered off because?" "Because sometimes the most interesting conversations happen when you're not looking for them." She met his eyes again and Damon felt that pull, stronger now. "Besides, I had a feeling about you." "What kind of feeling?" "The dangerous kind." Her smile was pure mischief. The kind that suggests maybe, just maybe, there's more to just Damon than expensive suits and power lunches. Damon found himself smiling back, really smiling for the first time in months. "You might be disappointed." "I doubt that," Samira said, and something in her voice made him believe her. "The question is, are you brave enough to find out?" 2 hours later, Damon was beginning to understand what people meant when they talked about losing themselves in Vegas. The blackjack table at Caesar's Palace hummed with energy, cards snapping against felt as dealers worked with practiced efficiency. Samira sat beside him, close enough that he could catch hints of her perfume, something exotic and intoxicating that seemed to wrap around his senses. She'd convinced him to leave the stuffy high-roller lounge, and somehow one drink had become 3, one casino had become 4. "Hit me," Samira said, her voice steady despite the champagne they'd been sharing. The dealer flipped a 7, bringing her total to 20. She leaned back with a satisfied smile, her bare shoulder brushing against his arm. "Your turn, hotshot." Damon looked at his cards, a king and a 6. 16. Any responsible gambler would play it safe. But nothing about tonight felt responsible, and the woman beside him had awakened something reckless he'd forgotten existed. "Hit me," he said. The dealer raised an eyebrow but complied. A 5 landed face up. 21. "Beginner's luck," Samira teased, but her eyes sparkled with approval as he collected his chips. "Or maybe I'm just good at reading odds," Damon replied, surprising himself with the playfulness in his voice. When was the last time he'd been playful about anything? "Is that what you call this?" She gestured between them, her meaning unmistakable. "Reading odds." The question hung in the charged air between them. Damon had been asking himself the same thing all night. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was madness. He had meetings tomorrow, contracts to review, a reputation to maintain. But Samira's presence seemed to quiet that voice, replacing it with something wild and hungry. "Maybe I'm reassessing the potential for acceptable risk," he said, his voice lower now. "Acceptable risk?" Samira's laugh was rich and warm. "God, you really are a businessman. Even when you're being spontaneous, you sound like a quarterly report." She stood from the table, gathering her chips with fluid grace. "Come on, Mr. Acceptable Risk. If we're doing this, we're doing it right." "Doing what exactly?" "Living," she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The next few hours blurred together like frames in a film reel spinning too fast. Samira led him through the neon labyrinth of the Strip with the confidence of someone who knew how to seize moments and squeeze every drop of possibility from them. They found themselves at a rooftop bar overlooking the city, the lights spread out below them like a constellation fallen to earth. "Tell me something real," Samira said, settling into the plush seating area she'd somehow convinced the hostess to give them despite the packed crowd. The champagne bottle sat between them, nearly empty now, and the city pulsed beneath a canopy of stars. "Real?" Damon loosened his tie, feeling unarmored in the best possible way. The whiskey and champagne had created a warm haze that made everything seem softer around the edges. Something that doesn't belong in a corporate bio. Something that matters. Damon considered the question, surprised by how difficult it was to answer. When had his life become so curated that he couldn't think of anything genuine to share? "I wanted to be an architect when I was a kid," he said finally. "I used to build these elaborate cities out of Legos, complete with transportation systems and parks. My father said it was impractical, that there was no real money in designing buildings. So I learned to design deals instead. Samira's expression softened. Do you ever miss it? Building things instead of just acquiring them? The question cut deeper than it should have. I build empires now. That's not the same thing. She moved closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. Empires are about power. Architecture is about creating spaces where people can live, love, dream. It's about making the world more beautiful. Beautiful doesn't pay the bills. Neither does miserable, but that doesn't stop people from choosing it. Her words hit him like a physical blow, not because they were cruel but because they were true. When had he become so focused on success that he'd forgotten what it felt like to want something just because it brought joy? What about you? He asked, needing to deflect attention from the uncomfortable truth she'd exposed. What do you dream about when you're not busy psychoanalyzing workaholics? Right now. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and she reached out to trace the edge of his jaw with one finger. Right now I'm thinking about what it would feel like to kiss a man who's forgotten how to take risks. The touch sent electricity shooting through his entire nervous system. Damon felt his carefully maintained control finally crack completely. That could be dangerous, he said, his voice rough. I'm counting on it. When their lips met, it was with the intensity of a dam bursting. All the careful politeness, the civilized conversation, the pretense of casual flirtation, it all disappeared in the heat of a kiss that tasted like champagne and possibility. Samira's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and Damon forgot every rule he'd ever made for himself about appropriate behavior and public decorum. Your place or mine? She whispered against his lips when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Mine? He said without hesitation. It's closer. The elevator ride to his penthouse suite felt endless, the space between them crackling with anticipation. Samira stood close enough to touch but didn't, seeming to understand that the building tension was half the pleasure. When the doors finally opened, revealing the sprawling luxury of his temporary home, she whistled low. Very nice, she said, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Strip. Though I have to ask, do you actually live in places like this or do you just inhabit them? There's a difference? Oh, honey. She turned back to him, silhouetted against the city lights, and Damon's breath caught. There's all the difference in the world. She was right, of course. But as she walked toward him with that confident, knowing smile, Damon realized that for the first time in years, he was about to discover what the difference really felt like. When her lips met his this time, it wasn't the desperate hunger from the rooftop. This was slower, deeper, an exploration that made his pulse race and his thoughts scatter like leaves in a hurricane. Her hand slid up his chest, pushing his jacket from his shoulders, and he let it fall without a second thought for the Italian tailoring or the cost. You taste like champagne and bad decisions, she murmured against his mouth, her voice husky with desire. Is that a complaint? It's an observation, Samira replied, her fingers working at his tie with practiced ease. I happen to like both. The tie joined his jacket on the floor, and Damon found himself backing toward the bedroom, guided by her hands and the magnetic pull between them. The city lights streaming through the windows painted everything in shades of gold and amber, turning the sterile luxury suite into something that felt almost magical. Wait, he said, catching her hands as they reached for his shirt buttons. I need you to know, this isn't something I do. I don't bring strangers back to my room, I don't lose control, I don't. Samira silenced him with a finger pressed to his lips, her eyes understanding in a way that made his chest tight. I know, she said softly. I can see it in the way you hold yourself, like you're afraid someone might catch you being human. But Damon? She stepped closer until there was barely an inch between them. Tonight, you're not a businessman or a billionaire or whatever empire you've built around yourself. Tonight, you're just a man who makes me laugh and looks at me like I'm the only woman in the world. You are, he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Tonight you are. Her smile was radiant, transforming her face from beautiful to absolutely breathtaking. Then stop thinking so much and help me figure out how to get you out of these clothes. What followed was a dance of discovery that left Damon's usual precision in tatters. Samira's hands mapped the contours of his chest with an appreciation that made him feel like a work of art rather than a machine built for making money. When he returned the favor, tracing the curve of her waist, the silk of her skin, She arched into his touch with uninhibited pleasure that nearly undid him completely. "God, you're beautiful," he breathed, his hands tangling in her hair as she pressed kisses along his collarbone. "So are you," she replied, and the wonder in her voice suggested she meant it. "You have no idea, do you? How beautiful you are when you forget to be perfect." They tumbled onto the bed in a tangle of limbs and whispered endearments, the Egyptian cotton sheets cool against heated skin. Damon had been with beautiful women before. Models, socialites, successful executives who understood the game and played it well. But this was different. This was Samira laughing when he got tangled in his own shirt, Samira gasping his name like a prayer, Samira looking at him with such open affection that he felt exposed and cherished all at once. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with want and something deeper. "Are you?" she countered, her hands framing his face. "Because once we do this, I don't think either of us will be the same people we were when we walked into that bar tonight." She was right, and they both knew it. This wasn't just physical attraction or the intoxicating anonymity of Vegas. This was two people recognizing something in each other, something that transcended logic and good sense and all the reasons why they shouldn't be here together. "I don't want to be the same," Damon said, surprising himself with the honesty. "I'm tired of being the same." "Then don't be." When they came together, it was with a passion that bordered on reverent, each touch and kiss a revelation. Damon lost himself in the taste of her skin, the sound of her breathing his name, the way she moved beneath him like she was born to fit perfectly against him. Time became elastic, minutes stretching into hours or compressing into heartbeats. Nothing existed outside this room, this bed, this woman who had somehow cracked open his carefully constructed world and shown him what he'd been missing. Later, much later, they lay tangled in sheets that smelled like sex and Samira's intoxicating perfume. She was curled against his side, her head on his chest, one hand tracing lazy patterns on his skin. The city pulsed outside their window, but inside their temporary sanctuary, everything was quiet and perfect. "Tell me something else," Samira said, her voice drowsy with satisfaction. "Something no one else knows." Damon considered the question, his fingers combing through her hair. In the afterglow, with her warm and pliant in his arms, he felt capable of honesty that would terrify him come morning. "I haven't been happy in a long time," he said quietly. I thought success was the same thing as happiness. But tonight..." He paused, searching for words. "Tonight I remembered what it feels like to want something just because it feels good, not because it serves a purpose." Samira lifted her head to look at him, her dark eyes serious in the dim light. "And what do you want right now?" "You," he said without hesitation. "I want you to stay. I want to wake up with you in my arms and take you to breakfast and show you my favorite places in the city. I want to know what makes you laugh and what makes you cry and whether you prefer your coffee black or with cream. I want..." He stopped, shaking his head at his own foolishness. "What?" "I want to keep you," he admitted, the words barely above a whisper. "Which is insane because I met you 6 hours ago and I don't even know your last name." "Brookes," she said softly. "Samira Brookes. And for what it's worth, I want you to keep me too. At least for tonight." They made love again, slower this time, with a tenderness that spoke of beginnings rather than endings. Afterward, as Samira drifted towards sleep in his arms, Damon found himself making plans. Breakfast at the little French place downtown, a walk through Central Park, maybe dinner at the restaurant where he'd never taken anyone who mattered. "Samira," he said softly, but she was already asleep, her breathing deep and even against his chest. He lay awake for a long time, watching the play of city lights across her face, memorizing the weight of her in his arms, the way she fit so perfectly against him it was like she'd been made for this exact purpose. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered warnings about tomorrow, about responsibilities and reputations and all the reasons why this couldn't last. But for once in his carefully controlled life, Damon Steele chose to ignore that voice. He chose to believe in the possibility of forever. Sunlight sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows like a blade, cutting across Damon's face with ruthless efficiency. He groaned, rolling away from the brightness, his head pounding with the kind of hangover that came from mixing champagne, whiskey, and something far more dangerous, complete abandonment of his usual restraint. The sheets beside him were cool. That detail registered slowly, working its way through the fog of sleep and alcohol to land with uncomfortable precision. Damon's eyes opened, focusing on the empty pillow next to his, the rumpled Egyptian cotton that still held the faint impression of another body. Samira. The night came flooding back in fragments, her laugh echoing across the casino floor, the way she challenged every assumption he'd made about himself, the electric moment when she traced his jaw with her finger. And then, his sweet champagne on the balcony, her emerald dress sliding to the floor like liquid silk. Damon sat up too quickly, the room spinning slightly as he pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. What the hell had he done? Samira? His voice was rough with sleep and something that might have been hope. Silence. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, the marble floor cold against his bare feet. The suite was immaculate except for his clothes scattered across the living room. His shirt draped over a chair, his tie hanging from a lamp shade like some sort of surrender flag. There was no sign that anyone else had ever been there. No, that wasn't quite true. Her perfume still clung to the air, that exotic scent that had driven him half crazy the night before. And there, on the nightstand, was a champagne flute with the faint impression of lipstick on the rim. Damon picked up the glass, staring at the evidence of her presence. Had he dreamed the whole thing? Some alcohol-fueled fantasy born from too many lonely nights and Hawthorne's pointed questions about vacation time? But no. His body remembered her touch too vividly. The way she'd looked at him like she could see straight through all his carefully constructed walls. The way she'd made him laugh, really laugh for the first time in years. The way she'd whispered his name like a prayer when his phone buzzed from somewhere in the living room, the sound cutting through his memories like a cold shower. Reality crashed back with bruising force. He had meetings today, contracts to finalize, a reputation to maintain. Whatever madness had possessed him last night, it was over now. Damon found his phone tangled in his jacket, the screen showing 17 missed calls and 43 unread messages. His assistant, his lawyers, 3 different business partners, and his brother Marcus, who never called unless someone was dying or getting married. The irony of that last thought made him pause. He scrolled through the messages, each one a reminder of the carefully ordered life he'd abandoned for one reckless night. Conference calls moved, deals delayed, his absence noted and questioned by people who depended on his constant availability. "Where are you?" Martinez had texted at 6 a.m. Hawthorne's lawyers called. "They want to meet this afternoon. Call me," from his business partner Reed. "The Tokyo deal is falling apart." "Damon, answer your damn phone," from Marcus. "Mom's worried. Said you were acting weird at dinner last week." "Weird? Right. Because wanting something more than quarterly profit reports was apparently a character flaw in the Steele family." Damon set the phone aside and walked to the bathroom, catching sight of himself in the mirror. He looked like he'd been hit by a truck, hair disheveled, stubble shadowing his jaw, eyes bloodshot and uncertain. But there was something else too, something he couldn't quite name. A looseness around his eyes, a softness to his mouth that spoke of laughter and genuine pleasure. When was the last time he'd looked this human? The shower was scalding, exactly how he liked it, but even the familiar ritual couldn't wash away the sense that something fundamental had shifted. As he stood under the spray, images from the night before kept surfacing like bubbles in champagne. Samira's hands on his chest, her breathless laughter when he tried to be serious about something trivial, the way she'd looked at him in the elevator like he was the only person in the world who mattered. And then she was gone, vanished like some beautiful mirage the desert had offered up to torment him. By the time he emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in the hotel's plush robe, Damon had almost convinced himself it was better this way. Clean break, no complications, no messy emotions to navigate. He could file last night under momentary lapse of judgment, and get back to the business of being Damon Steele, master of his universe. Almost. He was reaching for his phone when he saw it, a slip of paper on the coffee table, partially hidden beneath his discarded cufflinks. His heart rate spiked as he picked it up, hoping for a note, a phone number, some explanation for her disappearance. Instead, he found himself staring at a receipt from the hotel's concierge service. Transportation to McCarran International Airport, 5:47 a.m. Passenger, Miss Brooks. She'd left before dawn, scheduled a car while he was still sleeping off the best night he'd had in years. The efficiency of it was almost impressive, if it hadn't felt like a slap in the face. Damon crumpled the receipt, then smoothed it out again, studying the timestamp. 5:47 a.m. She'd been planning her escape even before they'd fallen asleep tangled in each other's arms, her head on his chest, her breathing soft and even against his skin. Had last night meant so little to her? Was he just another wealthy tourist, a convenient distraction from whatever her real life looked like? The thought stung more than it should have. His phone rang, Martinez's name flashing on the screen. Damon stared at it for 3 rings before answering, his voice carefully controlled despite the chaos in his head. Martinez. Jesus, finally. Where the hell have you been? Hawthorne's been calling all morning, and the Singapore investors are threatening to walk if. Handle it, Damon said, cutting him off. Handle it? Damon, this is the deal you've been working toward for 3 years. You can't just. I said handle it. Reschedule everything for tomorrow. He ended the call before Martinez could protest further, then powered off the phone entirely. The silence that followed felt different from his usual controlled quiet. This was the silence of possibility, of roads not taken, of chances that had slipped through his fingers like desert sand. Damon walked to the windows, looking out at the city that never slept. Somewhere out there, Samira was probably on a plane back to whatever life she'd stepped away from for one magical night. Back to her gallery, her friends, her world that didn't include corporate mergers and quarterly reports. A world where people could laugh without calculating the return on investment, where passion didn't require a risk assessment, where a woman could make a man forget everything he thought he knew about himself. He pressed his palm against the glass, the surface cool against his skin. Last night, she'd stood in this exact spot and asked him if he actually lived in places like this or just inhabited them. The question had seemed philosophical then, almost playful. Now it felt like an indictment. The suite around him, all marble and gold fixtures and carefully curated luxury, suddenly felt like exactly what it was. A beautiful prison he'd built for himself, one expensive decision at a time. Damon closed his eyes, trying to summon the memory of Samira's laugh, the warmth of her hand in his, the way she'd looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. But already the details were starting to fade, becoming more impression than memory. By tomorrow, he told himself, it would just be another story. The night the disciplined Damon Steele let a beautiful woman turn his world upside down for a few hours. His friends would find it amusing, his family would shake their heads, and life would return to its regularly scheduled programming. Except as he stood there, surrounded by the trappings of his success, Damon couldn't shake the feeling that something irreplaceable had walked out of his life with the dawn. And for the first time in years, all his money and power felt completely, utterly useless. 3 weeks later, Damon had almost convinced himself that Vegas had been a fever dream. Almost. He sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Steele building, Manhattan spread out below him like a chessboard waiting for his next move. The Hawthorne deal had closed successfully. Martinez had handled the negotiations with his usual efficiency while Damon was indisposed, as he delicately put it. The Singapore investors had stayed on board, the Tokyo expansion was proceeding on schedule, and his net worth had increased by several $1 million since that night in the desert. By every measurable standard, his life was exactly where it should be. So why did he keep catching himself staring out the window, wondering what Samira was doing right now? Mr. Steele? His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Your 3 o'clock is here. Send them in, Damon replied, forcing his attention back to the quarterly reports spread across his desk. Numbers didn't lie, unlike memories that seemed to grow more vivid with distance. He could swear he still caught hints of her perfume sometimes, walking through the lobby or riding in elevators, only to turn and find nothing but strangers. The door opened, and his head of legal affairs, Patricia Wong, entered with the kind of expression that usually preceded expensive problems. She carried a thick manila envelope and wore the carefully neutral face she reserved for delivering particularly unpleasant news. Patricia. Damon gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please tell me this is about the Morrison acquisition and not another SEC inquiry. Neither, actually. Patricia sat down, placing the envelope on his desk with the reverence normally reserved for live explosives. This arrived by courier this morning. It's from Las Vegas. Damon's blood turned to ice. Las Vegas? Clark County to be specific. The Bureau of Vital Records. Patricia's voice was carefully professional, but Damon caught the undercurrent of barely contained incredulity. Damon, when exactly were you planning to mention that you got married 3 weeks ago? The words hit him like a physical blow. For a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at the envelope as if it might explode. I'm sorry, what? According to this, Patricia said, sliding the envelope toward him. You and one Samira Brookes were legally wed at the Chapel of Eternal Love in Las Vegas, Nevada, at approximately 2:47 a.m. on October 15th. The marriage was officiated by one Elvis P. Henderson. And yes, before you ask, that's his legal name, not a stage persona. Damon's hands shook as he opened the envelope. Inside was an official marriage certificate, complete with the state seal of Nevada and 2 signatures he didn't remember making. His own handwriting looked unsteady, looping across the line next to groom, while Samira's signature was a confident flourish that somehow managed to look elegant even in official black ink. Chapel of Eternal Love. Christ. This is impossible, he said, though the evidence was literally in his hands. I would remember getting married. Would you? Patricia's tone was carefully neutral. Because according to the chapel's records, you also purchased their premium package, which included a professional photographer, a dozen roses, and a commemorative DVD of the ceremony. She produced another envelope, smaller and somehow more ominous. The photographer was very thorough. Damon opened it with the same enthusiasm he might have shown for a snake bite. Inside were a dozen professional photographs that made his stomach drop to his shoes. There he was, grinning like an idiot in his expensive suit, his arm around Samira in her emerald dress. She was laughing in one photo, kissing his cheek in another, holding up her left hand to show off a wedding ring he definitely didn't remember buying. They looked happy. Ridiculously, impossibly happy. In the final photo, they were exchanging vows in front of a man dressed as Elvis, complete with white jumpsuit and rhinestones. Damon was looking at Samira like she'd hung the stars personally for his benefit, while she gazed back at him with an expression of such tender affection that his chest tightened just looking at it. Jesus Christ, he breathed. The chapel also included a helpful timeline, Patricia continued, consulting her notes with a thoroughness that made her worth every penny of her considerable salary. According to their records, you arrived at 2:23 a.m., quite intoxicated but enthusiastic about the proceedings, I quote. You purchased rings from their gift shop, matching platinum bands, and insisted on upgrading to include a champagne toast and complimentary limousine service back to your hotel. Damon stared at the photos, trying to reconcile the man in the pictures with his carefully controlled existence. When was the last time he'd smiled like that? When was the last time he'd done anything without calculating the consequences first? The limousine driver noted that you and your bride were very affectionate during the return trip, Patricia added, and Damon caught the slight flush in her cheeks. I'll spare you the details from his statement. This can't be legal, Damon said, though he knew he was grasping at straws. I was intoxicated. Impaired judgment. There has to be some way to. Nevada has very liberal marriage laws, Patricia interrupted gently. As long as both parties appeared willingly and were capable of understanding the nature of the ceremony, the marriage is legally binding. And according to witnesses, you both seemed quite clear about what you were doing. She pulled out another document. The chapel owner, a Mrs. Dolores Martinez, provided a statement. She says you kept asking if it was really real, and when she confirmed it was, you said, and I quote, good because I want it to be real. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Even drunk off his ass, apparently he'd wanted to bind himself to Samira in the most permanent way possible. What did that say about his state of mind? What did it say about her? Where is she now? He asked, surprised by how rough his voice sounded. That's complicated. Patricia consulted her tablet. I hired a private investigator, discreetly of course. Samira Brookes, 28, lives in Brooklyn. She owns a small art gallery in Dumbo called Canvas and Light. According to public records, she has no criminal background, no significant debt, and no previous marriages. So she's clean. Remarkably so. Almost suspiciously so if I'm being honest. The investigator couldn't find any evidence of gold-digging behavior, no pattern of targeting wealthy men, no social media posts about luxury lifestyles or aspirational content. She appears to be exactly what she claimed, an independent gallery owner who lives modestly and supports local artists. Patricia paused, her expression shifting from professional to almost maternal concern. Damon, have you considered that maybe she had no idea who you were? Your name didn't appear in any of the Vegas coverage, and if she doesn't follow financial news. The possibility hadn't occurred to him. In his world, everyone knew who Damon Steele was, what he was worth, what he could do for or to them. The idea that Samira might have married him without knowing about his fortune, his power, his carefully cultivated reputation, it was almost too strange to comprehend. She left the next morning, he said, more to himself than to Patricia. Before dawn. Didn't leave a note, didn't say goodbye. Maybe she was as shocked as you are now. Maybe. Or maybe she'd realized exactly what she'd done and panicked. Maybe she'd gone home to Brooklyn to figure out how to handle accidentally marrying a billionaire. Maybe. What are my options? He asked, forcing himself to focus on practical matters. Annulment would be the cleanest solution, but it requires both parties to agree. Given that she left without a word, that might be challenging. Divorce is always possible, but in New York, you'd need to establish grounds, and Nevada recognizes community property. Patricia's voice faded into background noise as Damon stared at the photos again. In one, Samira was feeding him wedding cake. Apparently the chapel provided dessert as part of their premium package. Her eyes were bright with champagne and laughter, and she looked at him like he was the most wonderful surprise she'd ever received. When was the last time someone had looked at him like that? When was the last time he'd felt worthy of being looked at like that? Sir? Patricia's voice cut through his reverie. What would you like me to do? Damon set down the photos and reached for his jacket. For the first time in 3 weeks, he felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with profit margins or market share. Call Martinez. Tell him to clear my schedule for the rest of the week. May I ask where you're going? Damon paused at the door, his hand on the handle. The smart play would be to send Patricia to handle this. Clean, professional, no messy emotions. The smart play would be to treat this like any other business problem that needed solving. But looking at those photos, at the happiness he'd forgotten he was capable of feeling, Damon realized he was tired of always making the smart play. Brooklyn, he said. I'm going to Brooklyn. He had a wife to find. Their one night of chaos was supposed to stay in Vegas, but fate has other plans. When Damon confronts Samira in New York, their banter turns sharper, their chemistry hotter, and walking away. Impossible. The story isn't done, it's only about to get deeper. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications for the second and final part of this story. Thank you as you do so.